So welcome, Christopher David Mitchell. It's really nice to have you on here today.
Thank you. Pleasure to
So
be here.
so I have a knack for butchering introductions. So I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself to my viewers.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll keep it brief. But yeah, coaching here in London and loving it. Definitely the number one passion. And started off as a singer. I will keep this brief. And then, yeah, I was just super voice geek like yourself. This is why hopefully we get on. And was Skyping a lot of teachers in America and eventually worked with a lot that we know, like Brett Manning and the whole Singing Success team and Justin Stoney with New York Vocal Coaching. And then, yeah, was their UK associate, and that was a great honor. And then I've been doing sort of seminars and masterclasses and having a great time traveling with it, and just here in London at the moment, and just sort of, yeah, just loving the coaching and helping people as much as I can with it, really.
Good. So today I want to talk a little bit about exploring our voices fully and just kind of giving ourselves permission to make different sounds that we're not used to hearing necessarily coming out of our mouths, and being okay with us. And how do we get to that point where we're willing to explore our voices fully and accept those different sounds coming out of our mouths? So I invited you on today because I know in conversations we've had, we've talked about how you kind of pride yourself on being able to demonstrate a lot of different sounds and just being able to produce different qualities, and how you love to hear different qualities in other singers and such. And I thought it would be great for us to talk about just how to get to that point where we can bring ourselves to explore fully, and then also maybe even talk about some of the practical ways that we can try different sounds.
Yeah, cool. So I don't really have a choice in London because we get, and I don't know whether it's the same where you're at, but you get so many, someone's auditioning for Mamma Mia, someone's auditioning for Les Mis, someone's auditioning for all sorts, or there's a rock musical. So I can't teach one style. I can't teach one larynx position. I can't teach one thing because that's not what they want. So then I've had to adapt to make anything possible, as it were, and not say, well, high larynx is bad, or low larynx is bad, or false chords are bad, or this is bad, or because there's such a variety of singers out there, which is a wonderful thing. But the hard thing as a coach is to be able to help them all. So then I went on the path of just widening that with repertoire, with helping them technically as well. So one way, I mean, the larynx changes would be a big thing in terms of just change. It's all because changing sounds is really just changing our resonance. And obviously we've got our natural God-given resonance, but obviously there's so many changes we can make to play around with that. And then it's just what you want to sound like and what character you want to sound like for the part, etc. Let me think.
Well, I was thinking character. I mean, even you're speaking literally about characters on the West End, but even in terms of characterizations with our own voices individually, let's say we're singing pop or rock or jazz or whatever it might be, I kind of do see it that way too, that the different sounds that we make are kind of characterizations in some ways.
Yes.
We're being different characters. When I'm singing rock, I might be a different character than when I'm singing musical theater. It's still me at the core, but I'm putting on a character to some extent with my voice.
Yeah, and I talk about like neutrality is key with singing, and that is because if generally someone wants to come in and find their voice and their own voice, and yes, and a lot of people are very comfortable finding what's my voice or my true voice, and that's why I think neutral is a great place to start, because if we can start with a neutral mouth position, neutral larynx, and then after we found neutral in a lot of parts of our range, then after that, then we can play around. The problem with playing around too much is if you play around right at the start and there's no basic for technique. And then you have to be high larynx all the time, or you have to be low larynx all the time, or anything like that. Then you can get in a few traps. But if you've got a good bass point, that's a nice safety zone to then feel free to play around a bit more and experiment. And practical wise, I think, and I know you wanted to talk about this, so I'm not making this one up. You made this up with primal sounds. We talk about this. And another one with that is, again, characters. Yes, West End characters, and also like singing characters. And a good one for this is the animals sort of thing. So if you try to just go like meow or whatever, something stupid, sounds weird. But rather than saying, do you know what, I think you need a bit more nasal resonance, a bit more twang, a bit more brightness, but also stay narrow as you go higher. I mean, that is going to be super difficult for any singer. But if you just give them the character that everyone knows what that cat or whatever sounds like, then they will do all those positions naturally without thinking about it. So a good way to do it is with the animals, because if you try and tell a singer, or if you're thinking as the coach, I want a bit more twang, a bit more nasal resonance, a bit more brightness, but I want to stay narrow as I go high, all great things. That's too much for the singer. But if you say, just sound like a cat, meow, then, you know, we've got all those things in place naturally. So, I mean, a popular one for head voice is like the owl. You know, most people think, I can't get in a head voice. Well, just, you know, but because they're sounds that people are familiar with.
I've used that one before in terms of just learning to be able to kind of keep the resonator tract open, because I said, okay, you don't want to be like a baby owl. Ooh, 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 ooh. You want to be like this wise old owl. Ooh, 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 ooh. And you want that, you know, if you want that lower larynx kind of approach.
Exactly. And so, like, how do I lower the larynx? But if you say, just be a wise old owl, then 9 times out of 10 they will, and they won't need to think about it. So it takes the thinking out, as does primal sounds. I mean, I know you were talking about this.
Well, yeah, just even like, I was thinking, you know, even just some of the moaning and groaning type sounds, which can sound really inappropriate if I were to perform them.
Oh,
but just like that like it sounds really gross, but it's like, then you start to get like a sob in the sound.
Yeah.
And then it starts to, it sounds a little weird when you're just doing it as the sound.
Yeah.
But then when you start to sort of apply that to the songs that you're singing, to the vocal phrases, you get a very different texture and a different quality in the voice. So I'm just thinking in terms of the cat, like what instance would you use that in? Like can you think of an example of a song where you might use a cat?
Yeah, the cat's super good for like mixy belters, because we've got nasal resonance on the meow. Me, we start really bright, so we've got the twang in there as well, and like high tongue. We go to the brightest vowel, so getting brightness in, and then ow, and then we're narrowing as we're going up, which is the opposite to what so many people do, where they keep spreading as they're going up. So it's working the voice in sort of opposite fashion. What's the word I'm looking for? Antagonistic fashion. Yeah. So that's why things like that would work. And primal sounds is you're talking about a whimper. Again, so many people, because shouting is one of our primal sounds as well. If you to go like, hey, or taxi, or whatever, 9 times out of 10, people won't go taxi, you know, because they will instinctively, it's that emotional trigger, isn't it? It's the connection. But I would only use the sort of hey one if someone had like no chest voice. But then that's it. Then really the shout one, the call one is the better word for it, would be replaced with, as you say, the cry thing. Mm-hmm. And you can be funny. Go on. Go.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say I like to use these kinds of sounds as a sort of way of bypassing our conscious minds that want to kind of micromanage and control the sound so much. Even for myself, sometimes I just find I sort of improvise a little bit, and I'm working on something and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm overthinking this note. I've got this belted note at the end. I'm like, oh, I'm overthinking it. I'm trying to analyze my voice and what I'm doing here. And is my larynx high enough? Is it, whatever it might be. And then I'm like, no, just go back to like the baby's cry or something. Wah!
Yeah.
Wah! Just go back to that. That's a sound I know I can do. I'm not overthinking it. And look, oh, suddenly my voice is pingy and ringy. I'm getting closer to the sound that I want. And that's what I do all the time, because I will tend to sort of try to overthink how I'm coordinating the instrument on sounds that I'm not as confident with, or techniques that I'm not as confident with. I want to revert back to my sciencey brain and just kind of like, okay, well, I need to open here and I need to close here and I need to use this much breath and and it never works. It never works.
No, because what's going to win every time, like we say, is that natural body reaction. And plus, often when we're belting in songs, or I prefer the mixed belt, but anyway, so a bit of flexibility in that belt. But anyway, when we're doing that, it's normally at a very passionate or emotional point in the song. So the cry works perfectly anyway, because there's no massive belt moment that's not epic, really. It's very rare. So instead of the sort of core one, what? That's only going to go so far. But even if you just went, yeah, and then you hear all the time this sort of onset of like, oh, yeah, and that sort of yelp at the end. But then take the beginning, take that out, because that sounds a bit weird, and the yelp at the end. But then you're left with this more flexible register in the middle, the note that you find. So then you can just come in, hopefully, on like, ah! And you find like still some of that in there without ah! All the time. But initially, that's fine, just to find the cry, which is probably going to promote a bit more flexibility and chord stretch.
Yeah, once I get to around that A4 spot for me, when it starts to get to sort of that break area, A4, B flat, B in that area for me, that's exactly what I have to do in order to get the compression in the sound and not move into more of a heady sound. I go into this cry. How can he ignore? How? Yeah, I don't know what pitch after that.
No, that was great.
I'm singing that. Because if I don't do that, how, that's what I start to do, and it gets either airy or it gets kind of heady. But yeah, when I'm actually warmed up, it's a fuller sound without it being really pressed and pushed and shouty.
Because the cry is generally going to promote, as we said, lengthening and cricothyroid engagement. And the great thing is as well, it can be used all styles. So you hear pop singers like, what do you mean? Yeah, or whatever. They're crying on this higher larynx. And then even the opera people, they're crying a bit more on a lower larynx. So
yeah, it's more of a sob. Yeah, the sob is a little bit to me.
Well,
little low larynx.
But it's sort of just crying with the low larynx, really. So again, it's a great one for all styles as well. So I'd always replace the belty belt with a cry belt where I can.
And I find personally that tends to sound more musical, because it is more flexible. You have more control over it. You have more control over the dynamics, more so than just, hey, right? I mean, I can't go lighter than that in that exact same setup. And to me, it just always sounds like I'm just yelling. But if I go in that little bit more of a cry, I have more flexibility. And then there's the opportunity for vibrato at the end. But if I'm in a pure out, like full out yell, I can't get the vibrato at the end, because it's locked. It's locked in that coordination. It's locked in that resonance. And I don't have the flexibility. But you're right, exactly. Getting that into the sound is so much more effective.
That's why the way you're doing it. I mean, I'm doing the end result of the cry with this, but really, the way you're doing it is the first steps, is a light, I would even do it with a bit of nasal resonance. But anyway, so that then you can start, like you say, but you have to find it in that small whimpery cry. And then,
I do the whimper too, like.
Yeah.
Because what it does is it gets a little bit of thinning without losing, all of the substance. It's not a disconnected sound.
So true. Because what's people say, well, I'm struggling to hit high notes. And I'm saying, well, you're not struggling to hit high notes, are you? Just give me this. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't. And I was like, well, that's a high note. And they were like, oh, no, what I mean is hit high notes with intensity and volume. So what they're really going for is the lengthening, but still, if anyone's technical here, vocalis compression mainly, but some still, because when they want to go long, they want to break apart. So the idea is to stay long, but still keep some sort of intensity, and that's the hard thing. So the cry has the lengthening and normally a bit of chord closure at the beginning when people are going like, there's normally some strengthening as well. So it's a perfect blend of both.
It is. I've definitely found sorry?
I wish I'd patented this cry and made it up or something years ago. As in, like, it is so good. It is perfect.
It is. Well, I mean, honestly, the sob has been in like the classical teaching realm for quite some time, for centuries. It's something that really, if you listen to a really good tenor, there's sob in his high notes. There is sob. And yeah, the cry is definitely more of like that slightly higher larynx approach, which is what we use for a lot of CCM, a lot of contemporary commercial music. Mm-hmm. And it's just a way of, I just find it's a way of getting balance, because otherwise, again, I want to like yell, or I want to go into head voice, or I want to whatever it is, but I'm like, that's not what I want for that note. So if I cry into that sound, I get the compression that I need without the excess weight, without the pushing, without the digging into the sound. And that's really, once I discovered that in my own voice, it was so, I'll say liberating, but it was so like effective, because I could start to apply that to, again, the notes for me above A4, where I just don't want to be in an M1 coordination. I don't want to be in that chest voice, but I kind of need to be for some of the stuff that I'm singing. And it always, for the longest time, I just did the whole shout approach, because that's what everybody tells you with belt, right? You read it online, you see it on other YouTube channels, you hear, oh, well, belting is just, musical yelling, it's a soft yell. And I tried the soft yell. I tried that for years, and it just never worked effectively, because I just felt locked. And I never liked the sound of it. But when I started doing this into the sound, so much more flexibility.
The only thing is there's different cries, but your cry, because there's a sort of but yours is more of like a wah, wah. So you had the twang in there as well, built into your cry, which is maybe a better cry than mine. But so that's another good reason why the cry is working as well. So we've got.
But I do use a slightly less bright version too for some songs that I find. A little bit more of that in the sound. Yeah, it depends on the color that you want, but it's still essentially the same kind of mechanical action that's happening for the most part. The only real difference there, I think, is really more the height of the larynx between those sounds.
And the twangy thing as well will, as we know, create some narrowing, which will again encourage more of a mixed belt rather than just a full-on belt. So great recipe there with that primal sound. Use it all the time. And another one I like is, just before we go on, is being in pain. Now, I don't mean in a bad way. I don't mean tensing the upper abs and being in too much pain. Obviously, this is why with all these, we still need to go through with a coach, because you can cry a bit wrong still. You can do all these a bit wrong, and you could do anything wrong. We were talking about the meow. You could do that. You could do anything too tight or too whatever. But again, sometimes if someone's got this really weak, head voice or falsetto, and they've just got no sort of nothing quite to them, I'll pretend that I'm just going to step on their toes. And so they give me an which again is got a bit of crying there, but again, and it normally gets in that ow, it normally gets in a bit of brightness. And again, and if they give me a ow, they give me this pretty sound, what you're on about, like singing's pretty, we're going to make it pretty. I'd say, well, if I stood on you tour, would you really go, oh, like, would you really give me some, ooh? And so that's a good one to make them realize that, oh, actually, I could just react a bit more. And obviously, we don't want them overdoing that or shouting, but it's just where that intensity of belting comes from, something like that.
And I think that comes down to trusting our voices, that they're capable. Because honestly, I think I had a very sheltered life. I wasn't exposed to a lot of music early on. And I think that is something that influenced me a little bit in terms of how I shaped my own instrument. So what I listened to was kind of safer music, what little music I was exposed to when I was younger, and getting to that point where I trusted that I could make that sound. It's okay. I can try it. I'll be okay. My instrument can handle it because it's designed to yell. Like when I was a kid, never raised my voice ever. It was just not something. I wasn't a kid who yelled on the playground.
Quiet, Karyn. You got told as a kid.
I absolutely did. I lived in a house where my mother couldn't tolerate noise.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I learned to kind of just keep everything here. And it really honestly wasn't until I had children that I learned how to yell. Sadly.
Kids are great for the voice.
It's great. It's been so, liberating. But yeah, I feel like that was the big thing for me, was trusting that my instrument was capable. And I think I'd love to talk a little bit about that, is getting ourselves psychologically and emotionally to that point where we feel like we can try these different sounds. And using those primal sounds are great, because you're right. It's really responding to the emotion and responding in ways that we, like, just even the yawn, that lofted palate and what have you. I mean, we make those sounds. We yell. We do whatever, and we're not overthinking the technique, and we're not necessarily associating them with singing. That's the other thing too, because if we have this very limited view of what good singing, or limited definition of what good singing is or entails, what it sounds like, and then yelling and crying and cat meowing and what have you, it's way over there. It's not in this box that we have, right? And so learning to be able to step outside that box and accept that we can take those sounds and maybe broaden those boxes and put them around and encompass those sounds. That's, I think, a hard thing for a lot of singers who come from a background like my own, and who have temperaments like my own, because I am not by nature a risk taker. I am not a loud and boisterous person by nature. So again, I can control the sweet and pretty, because that's kind of the instrument I was born with. But I can't control those other sounds in the spectrum of what I'm capable of. But just, and getting to the point where I can accept those sounds coming from my own voice was really, really challenging for me, just breaking down so many expectations and limitations that were self-imposed.
Yeah, and it's a difficult conversation for me personally, not as a coach, but because I never had the box or felt there was one way I should sound. And I always thought I was weird when I was listening to like Bocelli and Linkin Park and all these totally different singers. But I loved it, and I still to this day appreciate them all so much. So in my head, there's nothing bad anyway, necessarily. People will say, but Chris, but glottals are bad, right? Glottals are bad. And I'll go, I just did 2 glottals then. Or, so, there's more chance generally of you just hurting your voice or doing something random in like a bar than there is in a singing lesson half the time. It just, in real life, we use glottals and this, or so in real life, all these coordinations happen anyway.
Well, I'm going to interrupt for a second. So that brings me back to something that we've discussed before too, is just really using the speaking voice as a sort of pilot into the singing voice. I think that, again, a lot of us think singing has to sound a certain way, and it's, you know, these extended syllables and higher pitches and what have you. But when we're speaking, we're so expressive. We inflect our voices and we use so many different qualities. And yet somehow, for some reason, we want to just throw most of them out the window when we want to sing. And it's kind of a pity, because we are designed to make so many different sounds.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably a bit different in opera because it is a bit more sung, shall we say. But the most I've connected with people who are singing is when they're doing, this is a speech type sing. Because if I was to say to you, you know, something like, you know, well, I'm not going to start saying love songs to you, Karyn, but, you know, if I was going to say something to you that meant something, like, you know, something romantic or whatever, if I said it, then you would really feel it. And if I started singing, it's a little bit funny, this feeling inside, and I was singing, like 9 times out of 10 people cut off from that. But if you can make it half speech singing in that mode, where you, then this is why speech level singing is a good term for the technique, because, and I will get people to treat sometimes the lyrics a bit like a monologue or a text. It's a classic thing to do, or really picture someone that they're singing it to and talking to. And the minute they start singing, sometimes, you know, so that's why, yes, speech-like quality things can be the most emotional, because it's the most that we're used to as human beings, hearing that real connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm working on a video right now with talking about how to get more emotion in our singing and such, and just really relying on that, the speech qualities, and just you know, how do I express anger in this situation if I'm looking at, you know, this lyric, and what am I singing right here? And okay, so I'm angry, or I'm sad, or whatever it might be, whatever emotion I've identified in that song lyric. And now how do I express that in speech? How would I express that emotionally? And then whenever I do that, it's interesting. I was working with a student a couple of weeks ago, and she's got this song that she's written, and she's really, really angry. She's been deeply hurt. But then the song has this like weird, like bouncy kind of, and she's singing it. And I got this image in my head. I'm like, oh my goodness, that reminds me of when somebody is like gritting their teeth, and they don't want you to, and they're in public, right? And they don't want to make a scene, and they don't want anybody to know how angry they are with you. And they're doing this, and they're looking like they're really happy, right? But they're not happy. And I'm like, what if you do that? What if you just grit your teeth a little bit and sing that line? Don't worry about, like, you know, the enunciation. Don't worry about your diction. Yeah, but she, you know, because she was like kind of trying to be too pretty, but also kind of just really, you know, mouthing the diction. I'm like, what if you did that? Just sing it through your teeth. And it was amazing, because as soon as she did that and she sang this line like this, all of a sudden this new texture came out of her voice that hadn't been there before. And she's like, whoa, I really like that. And I'm like, because what you've done is now you've gotten in touch with the characterization. You've gotten in touch with, you know, really, what is this song saying? I know you wrote it, but think about if you were speaking this to the person, how would you speak this? And what would you be doing? Again, you would probably be doing this. You're telling me that the song is bouncy, but like it sounds happy, but the actual lyrical content isn't happy. So how it would be, that's what the image I got in my mind was just that I'm so angry with you and I'm not going to make a scene, and doing that, you know. And it was just amazing, like what came out of her, just in that little tiny thing, exploring just how she would speak it to that person.
Yeah, and the example I do use is your song, because it's quite speaky and it's something that of an emotional connection. And so the equivalent to doing, I'll just do it again, it's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. That is the equivalent to if I spoke to you and go, Karyn, it's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. I'm not one of those who can easily hide.
I love it. I was so deeply moved. It was such a compelling performance
of what it would sound like speaking. But if you spoke it and said, you know, I don't have much money, quite whispery, but boy, if I did, then use that in a scene. I don't have much money, but boy, if I did. There's the little bits of the levels that you would use and the inclinations and everything of speaking, just stick them in, because that's exactly what we're trying to replicate, whereas a lot of people start singing.
Mm-hmm. And also, just while we're talking about keeping things kind of on a speech level, is allowing our natural speech patterns to sort of guide our phrasing. And what you just did there, how you have little pauses where maybe the original singer didn't have it there, but as you interpret the song and the emotion that you're feeling in this moment would make you want to maybe pause a little bit more on that note, or maybe sing it, with a little bit more intensity. And, I have moments where I have this one song, it's like, and I kind of sing like this, because she's kind of being like, I'm trying to be sexy and I don't want you to know, and it's like, if you proposed something, and it's funny because it's like, it doesn't sound pretty, but it's like, I kind of speak like this, and it's like, because that's like, if I were kind of like, but if he should offer a personal suggestion.
And the thing is as well, some of these that can be bad technique. So then the coaches, or our job, as is then to balance that slightly. If there's a lot of forcefuls in there, like with that Linkin Park sound that's really like angry, and but then this is why I'm very technical, but I will never scoff at anything that's bad technique if it's moving, emotional, and it feels authentic. So someone like Fabien will breathe like anything in between lines, but I love it. She'll go like, tell me his name, I want to know. And she'll go, the way he looks and where you go. But man, is it good? Because if she spoke to me like that in real life, I'd be like, whoa. So it's, and then you get like some vocal coaches, no, I'm not saying this, but some people could say, well, that's bad technique, but we're just longing for that connection. And if she can get away with it, and she does, my word, that works well on a mic.
It absolutely can. You're right.
That's one example of something that's technically not right, but sort of who cares? As long as it's done safely, and there's ways around this. Because something like that, someone will go, well, don't breathe in between the lines, or made it audible. But something like when she does it, wow. I mean, I love it.
And I think it depends on the style too, because you don't want to hear that in classical singing.
Yes, exactly.
But you're right. When you hear, I think it depends, because there are times that I've heard singers who are like gasping, and it actually is kind of off-putting. But then there are times where you can hear a little bit of a breath where it does sound nice. And I think it depends to me on several other factors. It's not just a clear cut, it always sounds good, or it always sounds bad.
Good. But you see it from Lara Fabian and Matt Bellamy and Muse on his Feeling Good. My, what? Birds flying. He's going crazy on it. But that's just one example of something that would be technically not right, but that if you can make it work, can really work. And there's a lot of that. Like I say, different rasps and different sort of distortions and things like that.
Well, yeah, I guess. So let's talk about rasping distortion just a little bit, because it's not an area of expertise for me, to be honest. It's not something that I've explored really fully in my own voice. What was that?
It's not a huge thing I talk about. If anything, I just like using it an example of like nothing's bad, because there's a lot of fixed dogma of when I try and teach a bit of high larynx, I'm sure you've heard it before, high larynx is bad, or you can't sing high larynx, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you can't breathe in between lines, or you can't use the false folds. But really, I mean, just generally listening to music out there shows that it's possible. There's people who've done it through their whole careers. And so rasp is one of them extreme examples where I'll just say, to just make people feel at ease again, when they're like, uh-oh, I just used a glottal. And it's like, yeah, but just listen to all the people who've done crazy stuff with their voice over the years, and it's lasted. And rasp is one of them ideas.
Well, just like anything else, there's a healthy way of doing it too, and there's an unhealthy way of doing it. And I
Yeah,
mean, look at Melissa Cross, right? I mean, what she specializes in is, death metal screaming, and she
yeah,
teaches, and she's got a classical background herself, and that's what she does is she works with these like death metal, heavy metal singers, and helps them be able to scream in a sustainable manner so that they can get through their concerts instead of like. It's so funny if you watch some of her promotional videos. She has like these clients who talk about how they were like screaming and like there was blood coming up. That's how raw they were and how awful. And she gets them to the point where it's like, yeah, it doesn't happen anymore. It feels very comfortable and I can keep doing this all night. And it's like, that's what it should be. So even though that may seem like a really extreme example,
yeah,
there is a way to learn how to do these, we'll say more expensive. There's certain techniques and sounds that are a little bit more expensive for the instrument, but there are ways of making them so that they're a little bit more sustainable, a little bit healthier. You
yeah,
still don't want to, sing on your interest. You want to sing on your capital, right? But I mean, that's what they need to do to succeed and to keep, to stay within the genre that they're most passionate about. And
yeah,
so they need to learn how to do that in a healthy, sustainable manner.
yeah. And the keys to that are, before I get any criticism for anything goes and sing rasp all day from the YouTube people, the keys are that, as we said at the beginning, we've got a good foundation of neutrality. We don't have to be raspy. We aren't being raspy or whatever it may be, this weird quality all the time. We don't need it all the time. It's a choice, it's an option, and we can do it in various stages of degrees. And that would be the key. And then, so this all ties in with the beginning. How do you feel comfortable making all these sounds? It's doing them in small stages and always going back to base.
I always call it the home base, that sort of,
Yeah. Oh, well, I know
neutrality.
that's great. We've just come up with, well, I've never called it home base, but I just, that's just great.
Yeah, I call it the home base. And I sometimes get a singer who's kind of a rock singer or something, and they come in and we're playing a scale and they're singing it with a little bit of distortion. I'm like, that's great, but I want you to sing it clean because I want to be able to gauge your vocal health. I want to be able to see how flexible your instrument is. Are you doing this because this is the only way that you're able to produce these tones? And then we work from there. If they're able to get a clean sound, I'm like, okay, for the next little while, I want you to just sing with a cleaner tone for now, sort of that neutral kind of quality and technique. And then we'll explore the rest later on. But for now, I need to kind of hear this so that I can gauge your vocal health and I can gauge where you're at technically with some of the just fundamental aspects of technique. And then we can explore the other sounds again after. Because obviously you can make those sounds, so we don't need to work on them, but I need to know where you're at right now. And it's hard. It's almost like static in the radio. It's hard to really hear a clear signal sometimes when you hear these other sounds, these other qualities on top of that foundation. And so I kind of want to like turn the dial a little bit so that I can get a cleaner, signal. And then I can hear what's being said, so to speak.
We're talking a lot about the rock contemporary, but an example in more the legit world would be vibrato. All the time I get singers in and they have to sing it with all this vibrato and they think that that's all great, and then I ask them, can you do it without? And sometimes they can't. So then it's not an add-on, it's you're doing vibrato because you're desperately trying to massage and shake up the muscles, because actually underneath it the chords are tight. That's what I've found a lot. People are desperately trying to shake something in there to loosen it. And so I'll take away the vibrato. If they vibrato, that was very northern then. As another example of not something that's bad, but another example of overcompensating for something if they always have to do it. And if they always have to do a certain thing, yeah.
Right, and sometimes the vibrato too is, they're actually, the larynx is like bobbing up and down, and sometimes you can make vibrato by really pulsating the abdominal muscles, and that coordination becomes deeply entrenched in all of their singing, and so they can't really effectively manage their breath, especially singing with a straight tone. And those are the kinds of things I want to find out. I want to find out where they're at in terms of their vocal health.
Yeah, and then it's not because we want to change anything. It's not because we're saying sing without vibrato. This is where people get scared. So I've got to try and make the student feel super comfortable. I'm not trying to change you. All I'm saying is, if we take away your little favorite thing for a second and we work out the musculature just on its own, then you're going to see way more improvements. Then we'll stick the vibrato or the rasp back in. That's the way to do it.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. Stripping it bare. And stripping the stylistic elements too, like just in general. I mean, I know we're talking about vibrato and what have you, but just the other little stylistic elements, like even a little vocal fry at the beginning of a phrase, whatever it might be. I don't want to hear that right now. We're doing this. We're just going nice and clean, nice and like just, yeah. And yeah, it's a good way of gauging where they're at. So I know that something that you wanted to talk about was ways in which singers learn. So
yeah, just because it's been a learning curve for me, as we know, like as coaches, learning all the time. It's not like we're any sort of like guru here. Like we always learn from the clients, the sort of like learning by listening. So like vicarious learning, kinesthetically getting on stage and doing it, and systematically actually just pumping in the scales. And for me, I remember there's so many people who come in and they're like riff great, say, for example, and then they get to their lesson and they go, well, what's a riff? Or they don't know anything they're doing technically, but they've got a great voice. And so the way I compare it now is, if you are a kid growing up in America, Ireland, Scotland, wherever, you're not ever thinking, I'll put the voice in this place and broaden my vowels here and this twang and that twang. So all that learning is vicarious learning, where you're just picking up pure ear. That was very northern. Pure ear. I need to stop being so northern. You're picking up purely from all the sounds around you. And so obviously all these 5-year-old kids have an amazing accent in the country that they've grown up, but they don't know what twang is or nasal resonance or blah-de-blah. And that seems to me to be where a lot of the natural, talented singers come from. The ones that come in and they've never had a lesson, this is the explanation for me, because there's too many girls that just listen to Mariah Carey and Ariana Grande and can just make sounds. Some people are just great imitators, and that's why as coaches, one coaching tactic is to demonstrate and imitate, because some people really need to just hear that and then they pick it up. They don't need to be told what they're doing or whatever. So that's an interesting one. And probably one of my weirdly main ones that's a bit not forgotten. What do you think? It's not forgotten in the world, but you know, some people can't describe how these people do it and they've never had a lesson. But it's like, but how do you describe the kid who grows up in Scotland with a perfect accent? They've never asked about it. And I think as human beings, we're very, very good at imitating at times and picking up stuff.
Definitely, yes. Languages are something that I'm very passionate about, and it's interesting. So when we're growing up, right, we're sort of immersed in that culture, and the language is everywhere. Yeah. So we're hearing it everywhere. And then also, you know, we're gradually learning to make those sounds. It doesn't happen overnight. Babies just don't come out being able to speak in complete sentences. No, it takes them years. It takes them years to get certain sounds. And, you know, by 3 years old, they may still be missing a few sounds in their vocabulary or their language. And, you know, and then by 4, they've got a few more of those sounds, and by 5, a few more yet. And I think sometimes those singers kind of expect that they'll always be able to make sounds immediately. And if they can't make it, well, I'm not designed for this. Like, I'm not. And we have to understand that it is a process of being exposed to it a lot and really hearing it coming from different places, and then being able to just take the next step and physically try to make that sound, to imitate it, because a kid doesn't learn how to speak by never speaking.
Oh yeah, so then you've got to go on to doing it. I remember a good example was I was teaching a seminar with an opera singer who was with New York Vocal Coaching as well. Her name was Judy Roymott. Her name is Judy Roymott, and she's got this great opera voice. And I said, "Do you think you're a born opera singer?" Or is that something you've learned over time? And she said, I don't know, but all I know is opera was always playing around the house when I was growing up as a kid. And I said, well, then you associate that to be good singing. You've made them sounds. And I don't think she liked this, but I told her that you're not an opera singer, as in, she is an opera singer. As in, if you'd have grown up in a different environment and listened to rock, she would have had that. It's not like the voice is set up, this is an opera thing. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's more to the fact that she grew up listening to that was the correct sounds to make. And then she's just always been able to sing. And that's an example that you hear a lot, like Michael Bublé saying, you know, I grew up listening to Frank Sinatra or whatever. And it's just no coincidence then that he makes those sounds. And some people, I mean, and he does imitations. Ariana Grande does imitations. Some people are just so good at doing that. And then they never have to do a scale. They never have to do too much. But like you say, you still need to get it into your voice. And so if this hasn't happened already with a client, then we have to build it in systematically. And then that's where the scales and everything come into. And also kinesthetically, everyone needs to just do it as well. Because if we just sit around with scales, this is a common one. If I can sing the scales great, but when it comes to the song, and that's because they haven't got enough experience just getting on stage and doing it. And I was just going to say with the kinesthetic learning as well, that last one of actually doing it more is once you've done all the scales, if you go on stage for the first time, you might, you know, you're not used to that as well. So you need to gain practice in actually that feeling of that live performance or feeling of being in the recording studio and doing it as well. So they're the three main ones for me: systematic, kinesthetic, and the imitating one. I forgot what it was called. Totally forgot what I was saying now. I'm tired, it's late. Vicarious learning. Right.
So kinesthetic to me, I mean, it really has to do with, you know, body awareness and such. And so how much do you, when you're teaching a given skill, quality, whatever it might be, to your students, how much do you have them pay attention to how things feel when they're singing it so that they can sort of replicate that later on?
Yeah, great one. And you know what? This is where some of the singing technique goes a bit wrong, of the head voice and chest voice. People say, am I singing in chest voice? Am I singing in head voice? I'm not sure if I feel it there or there. I know we're talking about sensations here, but I just want to touch on this one. And what I always say to them is, what did it feel like to you? Where's it at on you? Is it, you know, in the nose? Is it in the cheeks? Is it in the ears? Is it in the top of the head? You still got me, because wherever it feels for the singer is, if I hear that it's right, then it's in the right place for them. And so a lot of people will go wrong with feel of thinking, well, I should feel it in the head to be in head voice. And I've heard singers being in a perfect head voice, and I've said, you feel it here, right? And they're like, no, I don't feel a thing. And so that's where people can go a bit wrong with the feel, is if they try and feel what someone else is feeling or what they're meant to be feeling, because we're all shaped differently. And that air and resonance is going to conductively bounce in all different places. I mean, just chest voice itself is conductive. There's no actual resonance going on there. It can only happen above the vocal folds. So this is just a byproduct of conductive resonance. So that in itself is flawed. So on feeling, I will hear for the coordination, and then I will say, well, where does it feel to you? What does it feel like to you? Oops.
I find, for example, doing like the cry, going back to the cry at the beginning, right? I feel something. I can feel that compression. I'm aware of it. I can feel that, you know, like glottal onset. I can feel all that. And then being able to develop an awareness of that sensation so that when I go to apply it to a song, then I know it's like, okay, so I've got it right because it feels just like it did when I was doing that exercise or when I was making that sound and what have you. And being able to use that to some extent as a reliable means of replicating the sounds that we're making. That's what I find. And when I'm doing the exercises with students, when I'm working on these primal sounds or just things like that, just the emotional kind of qualities in the voice, is I use those experimental sounds as a means of getting them aware of how it should feel when they're getting things right. And then now they have some sort of, we'll say, litmus test. Now they've got something to go back to when they're making those sounds in the songs that they're singing. They're like, oh, yeah, it feels like that exercise, or it feels just like that sound I made earlier, or it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel good. Why did it feel good when I was doing this? And learning to be aware of that, I think that, okay, yeah, when I make it that way, yeah, it feels good.
Yeah, I think the vocal coach is the ears of the room and the singer is feeling it. And if the singer tries to be the ears, then it can go wrong, because then they can sort of be listening to themselves and then, as you say, over-judging their sound, over-analyzing. And we know that singers within yourself, you don't hear what someone else hears in the room. It's coming across differently. So the singer should go more by the feeling, and we should be listening that it's right as coaches. So yeah, for sure on that one.
And also not just the listening, bone conducted hearing versus air conducted hearing, which, it's always a little bit different for how we hear our own voices compared to how other people hear it. But just, again, judging the voice aesthetically, and sometimes just hearing sounds coming out of our mouths that maybe are sort of like sounds in embryo. They're not fully developed sounds. They're incomplete sounds. And sometimes we want to reject them immediately without really letting them completely mature, without really letting them become all that they're capable of becoming. And we have to be really careful not to judge a given sound prematurely or too aesthetically, because then we're possibly going to be rejecting sounds that we could actually apply to our singing, and coordinations that could actually help us make the kinds of sounds in the end that we actually want to make.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. If you stay in this box of safety, that's what you'll always do. And I think that's down to us as the vocal coach as well, because we've got to really try and make it a safe environment. Everyone wants to sound good. Everyone's worried about how they come across. So as soon as someone, say, cracks on an exercise, I'm like, great. But it is great, because that is it's a good thing. That's the voice protecting itself, the vocal folds lengthening, saying, let's go to this nice flexible gear. And it's still good to know that. And it's still good that it does do that.
And I would say that means that we can work with that, because now you have the flexibility to actually get into that other register.
Yeah.
If you weren't breaking, then I would be more concerned. I mean, if you weren't completely skilled at going through the passaggio and you kind of get stuck, I'd be more concerned.
Yeah. And every time a voice breaks, it's normally when we're about to find a new coordination. 9 times out of 10. Because if I just pull people up in chest voice or keep people in pure head, they're never going to break. But when I'm doing them real mixy 50-50 CTTA balance exercises, at first it's going to go. And so you've just got to be totally fine with that, and know that if you don't make a few of them weird sounds, then you're not going to build in some new coordination. That's the process with all muscles. Like the first time you either clench or let go, but the first time you try and hold the weight right in the middle, it's going to shake because it's not used to being there. And so is the voice, and so it's the same thing. And I think it's just the charm of the vocal coach to make them feel at ease with that, because people get very self-conscious about the sounds they're making, as you say.
I'm amazed at how many students apologize to me when they make when they make those unpleasant sounds, as though it's like I haven't heard it before or something, or as though they're killing my ears or something. But it's like, no, this is great. It's giving me information about your voice. I want to hear these kinds of things. Yeah. And their voice cracks. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, why are you apologizing? That's what you're here for. Like, you're here for me to help you, not crack.
I'll normally make them feel better and just start cracking. I'll normally make them feel better and just sing badly, just for a second. Just say, well, we can all do this, and just go and just make some weird sound and put them at ease.
All right, so I have to go. I have a lesson coming up, but I want to thank you very much for joining me. This has been a really great discussion. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this.
Me too. I've absolutely loved it. I've been a fan of your work and your channel, and I do hope we keep in touch and help each other become better coaches as well.
Most definitely, most definitely. I really enjoyed this. And for those of you who would like to get in touch with Chris, feel free to check him out on his Facebook page. I'm going to put the link to that Facebook page in the description box below so that you can get in touch with him and find out what he's been up to.
Great. Thanks so much.
Great. Wonderful. See you soon.